welcome to my channel. Thank you for tuning in. I am Lana, the educator. In this week's episode, join me as I explore the Ministry of Education's cultural transformation policy. In this episode of Teachers Have Issues, Yes, I'll look at what exactly is a cultural transformation policy, an overview of the Government of Trinidad and Tobago's cultural transformation policy, concerns about the cultural transformation policy from a teacher's perspective, and the case for teacher inclusion in the decision-making process. You are listening to Lana the Educator. If you are interested in all things educational, then like and subscribe. If you're a student striving for success or a dedicated teacher shaping young minds, a paraprofessional making a difference, or an administrator leading the way, this channel is your place for inspiration, insights, and invaluable resources. If you're a first-time listener on this channel, welcome. I invite you to explore with me the latest educational trends, tackle pressing issues facing the education sector, and share stories of triumph and innovation from classrooms around the globe. So what is cultural transformation, and what is the cultural transformation policy? It is really a collective shifting of individual behaviors to support a shared goal. So it's basically a roadmap on how to achieve a cultural shift. And this can take place through an entire institution or an entire country. But it requires changing the hearts and minds and skills of the workforce to support the desired culture. It means that individuals must first have conviction, heart, to change their behavior. Then they must understand what behavior change looks like, meaning their mind, and have the necessary tools, the skills to change. And this is what cultural transformation is, and this is what this policy that is supposed to be implemented from September is intending to do. So based on what I just said, you can see the potential problems emerging here, and I'll get back to that in a bit. Now, any cultural transformation policy should really aim to shift the values and behaviors and the norms within society. But I think there are some primary challenges that we have to consider. Before we do that, let me give you an overview of the cultural transformation policy of Trinidad and Tobago, which really stems from the National Development Plan with the Vision 2030 for Trinidad and Tobago. And this relies on citizens displaying positive values, attitudes, and behaviors. So yes, there's a need for it, no doubt. And the government of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago views education as the key driver of the cultural transformation to achieve Vision 2030. The intention is for this to be an achievable goal over the course of 7 years, which represents the time a typical student takes to progress through all the stages of primary school. And all of this is to be done in keeping with the Strategic Initiative Action 7.3 of Goal 7. And there's a theme which states that there's a revision of the school curriculum to emphasize core values like nationalism and workforce readiness skills. Core values under this strategic initiative action must be taught in schools, and these include discipline, production, and tolerance, which incidentally are the core values and also the watchwords of Trinidad and Tobago, also including core values like civic responsibility and lifelong learning. There's an impetus for knowledge of our cultural diversity, which must be taught in order to promote cohesiveness, and our country's history and geography must also be imparted. There's also, under this theme, workforce readiness skills like problem solving, innovativeness, creativity, along with entrepreneurial abilities must be supported throughout the education system. So a culture of research and development in this initiative must also be inculcated in all tertiary level institutions, both public and private. Sports, culture, and physical education must also be integrated. So it's a lot, it's big. And this is the strategic initiative goal that the government of Trinidad and Tobago is looking to align itself with. Some of the recommendations of this policy is that the modern education system should ensure that the education system itself is relevant by instilling positive behaviors. Okay. Also, preparing a disciplined workforce. Another recommendation is that for curriculum revisions, emphasizing core values like discipline, production, tolerance, and promoting innovation and entrepreneurship, integrating those values through goodwill, honesty, respect, tolerance, integrity, and civic pride, and then looking at comprehensive education, the development of technical life and the 21st century skills that will be needed by our students, and then teacher and principal development. So that means instituting professional development and looking at upgrading and maintaining the school infrastructure and digitizing school data. So it's a lot over 7 years. So the policy also looks to target a wide audience, right? Which is something I want to touch on as well, that I'm going to get into with you, and where one of my major concerns stem from. But it's basically looking at a wide variety, not only of audience, but also of stakeholders. That includes the Ministry of Education, school principals, educators, parents, learners, and the wider citizens to drive this cultural transformation process that is to take place. And its intention is to share the cultural policy through education programs, between 2023 to 2027, because the intention is to create a progressive society by nurturing values, attitudes, and beliefs, right? So yes, I can see the value and the efforts of Trinidad and Tobago and other countries to do this, or the value and the efforts to align itself with the regional cultural policy. If you didn't know, CARICOM also has a regional cultural policy, which states that their own regional policy is to be seen as an instrument that aims at empowering people to be liberated through their creativity and self-development. In the Caribbean community, the policy is to be located within the framework of the struggle of the democratic society. And this is from page 4 of the regional cultural policy of CARICOM. So remember my mention of the potential problems with this, and I'm really going to speak from an educator's point of view here. I'm not sure to what extent the public or my listeners are aware of the drive to institute the cultural transformation policy. But for me, one of the major challenges come from attempting to change the hearts and minds of the people. Now, pause and think for a minute about our society, and then consider what we might have to deal with. So one, I want to consider the deep-rooted beliefs that we have. We may think that society is lawless or so, but people's beliefs and values are often deeply ingrained, even if they're not aware of them, and it makes them resistant to change. So something like a cultural transformation policy requires altering long-standing norms and practices, and that, I think, can be met with really strong resistance. We also have to consider the diverse perspectives. So you have a society of organizations that comprises of individuals with diverse backgrounds. Trinidad and Tobago and other countries around the Caribbean are multicultural countries. So crafting a policy that addresses and respects this diversity while fostering change is really complex. And they've done it. It has been done. As we see, there's a move to implement the policy. But then one of the concerns out there as well is the communication barriers that might come up. Can implementers effectively communicate the reasons for the change and the benefits that this cultural transformation policy is going to bring? So we have to consider that we will face the challenge of miscommunication or even a lack of clarity. And you will see me address this a little bit later on. I mean, this was sent to me. There was a document and we were told to implement it, and, things come down, but, I'm not too sure about the inclusion of teachers in the planning process. So that's something I want to address a little later as well. And simply the usual fear of the unknown. People may worry about how the transformation will affect their roles or their sense of identity. And this can lead to resistance because you have some established institutions, you have some established power structures that may resist this change of cultural transformation, and that's threatening their traditional ways of operating with their authority. So this is something that nags me at the back of my mind that I would also want to look at again a little later on. And then, of course, you have the implementation challenges. How are we going to translate this policy into action that actually requires effective resources and leadership and implementation strategies, right? And then how are you going to measure success of this thing? Um, it might be hard to quantify. I mean, I think we have to wait a while. The answer maybe we have to be patient because it is expected to take place over the course of 7 years, where we expected to see the changes that might be taking place there. But those are some of the concerns that I really had when I saw the initial document um, for the cultural transformation policy. So I'm not criticizing the policy. Obviously, it has great value. No, not by any means am I criticizing it. I completely agree with the impetus for this initiative. But based on what I understand, it begs the question for me, one of the first things is, since when is it that teachers have been deputized as arbiters of morality? Now, you don't get me wrong, I've done an entire podcast on the moral and ethical responsibility of teachers, but even I have some concerns about the appropriateness and the impartiality of teachers to administer this particular curriculum. So it begs the question, and I beg the question, should teachers be responsible for shaping culture and ethics? Right? So what you have is the rolling out of a major initiative aimed at driving cultural transformation in our education system. And the plan is for this to be done through varied revised curricula, disciplinary practices, teacher training, and more. And the policy seeks to instill stronger values and reduce antisocial behaviors and equip students with vital life skills. And yes, I am cheering. I am all for this. I see the need for this. And the well-intentioned goals are very admirable. So, of course, who could argue against fostering positive mindset? Who could argue against something like this policy and practical capabilities in young people, ethical foundations, right? Who can argue against that? But the question is whether placing the responsibilities squarely on the shoulders of the teachers and the schools, and is that appropriate or wise? Now, the policy did say uh, a number of varied stakeholders, of course, but at least from my point of view, and I'm telling you, I would, completely transparent here. I do not have all the information, so you can correct me if you know more. I would love to know more. But as far as I know, the only documentation that came out was those directed at teachers, right? So to be fair, they didn't solely say, teachers. They said a broad spectrum of partners would be involved, right? But I know teachers have received documentation and instructions as to what is to happen in September of this year. But have you, parents, and have you, the wider citizenry, received any instructions or documentation? And this brings me back to the question, since when is it that teachers have been deputized as arbiters of morality? And you have us in a catch-22 kind of situation, because to ask the question means that you can counter with, so you're saying you're not moral? You're saying as a teacher you don't have morality? No, I'm not asking you why are we alone culpable. And yes, we are moral, but I want to ask, why are we culpable and not parents? When is something going to be done to hold parents more responsible for their children? And when are they going to be given mandatory requirements? So you may, hem and haw about democracy and freedom, but we have laws, don't we? Laws are mandatory, broken as they may be, but ignorance of the law is no excuse, right? So how certain are you then that parents are not going to undo what we have been spending hours a day trying to instill? What if a parent resists? What what can be considered indoctrination? Are you prepared? Will you be responsible then? So I may be sounding cynical, but this is reality. These are questions that I think we can stop for a minute and ask. And there's no doubt that teachers, through their daily influence and interactions, yes, we do play an indispensable role in shaping the norms and the mindsets and the behaviors of the students that we instruct. Yes, we are on the front lines. Yes, we are not just instructors, but we are moral guides and character developers. And people may say, or they may give lip service that children look up to authority and figures and model citizens that teachers are. But tell me, pause for a minute. Do you really still believe that in this day and age? And given what you've been seeing in society, and what you've been seeing in society is not the sole responsibility of teachers. Yes, we bear some responsibility, but think of the other major stakeholders or holder that should also be held culpable, right? So it's impossible to completely disentangle moral and cultural education from academic learning. I completely agree with that. And it's not only moral, education we are being asked to do here, it's cultural transformation. So I can see that, yes, I agree with Nelson Mandela here, who said that education is the most powerful weapon which you can use to change the world. And I think that's a complete a summation and a driving force to what might be driving a cultural transformation policy. So yes, I recognize that teachers must instill principles of things like hard work and integrity and good citizenship. But still, many of us can argue that there are limits to how much of the moral education and cultural shaping burden that should fall on us. So let me ask you, aren't parents and community institutions better positioned as primary inculcators of fundamental ethics and values? Simply put, aren't the parents the best group to engage in such a cultural transformation? So yes, I can tell you that we reinforce the positive behaviors, we expose students to uplifting lessons, but part of me wants to let you know that families and societies have to also take the lead role in actually instilling virtues and, instituting this moral compass in their children. If I, as an educator, if I am battling against opposing value sets from a student's home life, then my job becomes very difficult to be every day battling against society itself and what students are seeing on social media and what they're exposed to in their home life. So think about that for a moment. We as educators are battling against this. It's an extraordinarily difficult thing to put the burden on us. So when I asked earlier about parents, who might resist, who might see a cultural transformation policy as indoctrination or so forth, I want you to consider, yes, that with religion playing a central role in the concept of morality and ethics for many Caribbean citizens, some will question whether teachers should be broaching such topics at all. So a parent can argue that, they send their children to school to expecting professional educators, like the teachers, to be only focused on academics and building intellectual capabilities. And if we are going into the realm of moral and cultural education in a multicultural society like ours, then this might best be left to families and our religious institutions. That's something we can consider. And for me, there has to be a balance. I can see the point of a parent or other stakeholders saying that academic alone, that's separate from ethics and character development, that's not going to prepare my child for the world, right? So you might have a case where the child might end up misguided and unprepared for the harsh realities of the workplace and society. And this is probably how we arrived at the impetus for this policy, right? So if not through schools and teachers, how else can we set youth on the right path? Is that the question? If not the school and the teacher, then who? But something about that doesn't sit right, okay? It doesn't sit right with me because it keeps bringing up for me the debate in my mind about schools developing well-rounded, ethically grounded citizens as opposed to just imparting academic subject knowledge. So yes, teachers have some responsibility for moral education. I am not denying that. And developing positive cultures and behaviors, yes, teachers have some responsibility for that as well. And they do that. They have the responsibility because this is done through their conduct and through their lesson planning. So I could understand the concerns, though, that other stakeholders and parents might have over absolutism or overstepping family and religious bounds. And just the idea of overwhelmingly already, overburdened educators having to deal with this particular, new task. So this brings me now to what I might just call this a part three, teachers' concerns. Yes, I will not lie. After I first asked, what is this now? What is this descent for us to do again now? Besides the content areas. And some people, yes, we have chosen this job. We are not solely doing one subject or one thing. Many teachers have 2 to 3 content areas, right? And I asked, after this, my first thought was, or one of my first thoughts, more work again? So yes, I'm human. I wouldn't deny, it's no surprise that one of the biggest concerns was that. And the concern came from out of my concern for curriculum overload. And it's not just for myself, but for everybody else, for the people you work with, for the people you know out there. And let me tell you now from an educator's perspective, I'm not speaking for every teacher out there, but I'm sure some would agree that we will worry about adding new content to related to core values or cultural diversity to an already packed curriculum. And that's going to make it difficult to cover all the required material effectively. Because I feel like you seem to be wanting me to do things outside of my content area, which we already do. But it is clear that, okay, this inclusion of this policy needs an adjustment of the typical school day, which, yes, the policy provides for and which you have done. But it seems to mean to me that all teachers are now expected to do 2 or more content areas. And in some cases, it will now be 4 areas of teaching. As the cultural transformation policy seems like it's a formalized system. It has been formalized. It's been well planned. And you will want to say, teachers lazy. We are lazy, but you are now putting an extra task and workload on those who will have to take up, if people out there didn't know, aside from teaching several content areas, you have form teacher roles, which already incorporate some of what we're being asked to do in the cultural transformation policy, and then which has a lot of other added data entry tasks and paperwork tasks, right? Yes, you may have assistants, but that just means that 2 teachers per class now have to prepare for, instituting a cultural transformation policy. And, I'm just thinking, Lord help the primary school teachers who already probably have 14 or more subjects to teach, you know? And then what about training and resources? The policy does, yes, they do mention this. It is well thought out. We have good policy planners here, but where you would state in the policy uh, concessions for training and resources, and we'll already have limited resources. Just speak to any teacher, they'll tell you what they don't have to effectively teach these new areas without proper support. So yes, they said that they will offer support, but the reality in many times have been different. And then there is the feeling in conversation with other teachers that you just feel unprepared to deliver the content as intended because it's so outside of what is your specialization, if you want to say, or your content area. And then How are you going to assess this if you implement this as something that needs to be taught? How are you going to measure student understanding and progress in areas like tolerance? How are you going to measure tolerance? How are you going to measure civic responsibility and lifelong learning? And yes, a timetable was offered in how to deal with the time constraints because that was one of the major issues. And it's still going to create time management challenges. And you should hear some of the things we discussed once the policy came out and the time for school start and lunch was adjusted. Because if the children find that this does not have any value for them, they do what they normally do and just come to school late and skip that part of the whole school day. So what measures are we going to put in place to ensure that the children actually come to school? Because our responsibility in school begins then when the child comes onto the compound. So who is going to deal with the children coming to school late with tardiness and irregularity and unpunctuality? You can answer me that. So the time constraints are there, right? Not just with respect to the timetable and student absenteeism or irregularity and unpunctuality, but finding the time within the school day to address this issue, this requirement, and still maintain the focus on the core academic areas. And what about student engagement in topics like discipline and civic responsibility and lifelong learning? That obviously is going to be a challenge. I think one most teachers will be up for, but if students perceive that these things are less interesting or irrelevant to their immediate lives, we're going to have big issues because, as I said, yeah, people say or they give lip service to teachers as role models, but really the actions don't match the words, not of the teachers, but of the public, because you have out there competing value systems from what the children see on social media. So student engagement is definitely going to be one of the hurdles we're going to have to overcome in implementing this policy. And then you have teachers might worry about addressing, yeah, we're a culturally diverse society and we do a lot of this just kind of seamlessly. I think naturally it's a very organic when we deal with culture for the main part here in Caribbean and in Trinidad and Tobago. But there's that fear, I believe, in inadvertently offending students or mishandling discussions on cultural differences. That's something we have to begin to be careful about. So if we neglect to understand that students have a very persuasive and insidious role model out there, this thing called social media, and their influencers are no longer teachers unless teachers entertain them, right? We have a major problem if you don't understand that, because you have TikTok and Instagram and Trinidad artists and all of these things that compete against what it is we are going to be starting to do here with this cultural transformation policy. So how do you plan to combat that? And you know, it's there, so why don't help come in the form of launching the social media campaigns and media campaigns involving all of these artists to promote these values? So I keep coming back to the major concern that while they said there would be other stakeholders involved, it seems like a lot of it is simply falling on the teachers to implement this policy. Many of them the citizens themselves do not know half of what you're asking teachers to teach. So again, it comes back to my point of teachers having to combat competing value systems. And we are just spending so many hours a day with these students, a lot, but still, they go back out into society, which they see as more influential than teachers, right? And how do we ensure the uniformity in adapting to the unique needs of these students? How do we ensure uniformity across the board when we have schools that are not uniform in nature, right? And what about the parental and community response? What about the reaction of parents and the wider community to the new policy? That might be a concern, you know, of teachers there. Teachers could be apprehensive about, this resistance from parents who might have differing views on the core values being taught. You say that parents are to be involved, but what measures have been put in place to ensure that they participate in what seems like a mandatory initiative that has been given to teachers? One of the concerns is that what we do in school is not reinforced at home. Let me play the devil's advocate here. What assurance do we have that teachers are ethical and moral, right? Yes, we've been vilified often, as we have when this comes on stream, right? When this comes on stream, I don't even want to think of the backlash, probably. And I'm being very negative Nancy here. Yes, because I'm concerned. And people say, yes, in truth, them teachers is the worst. What guarantee do we have that students will listen to what we have to say outside of our content area? Theoretically, students spend a significant amount of time in school and with their teachers, but the other half being spent with their parents if their parents are at home. And the students you are trying to reach often do not have that support. The parents often don't even know where to start. How often have we been called in, or have we called in a parent after the last straw only to be told, sir, miss, I don't know what to do now? And yes, our schools have reached a state where the police have more intimate and contact knowledge and with students than their parents. We've reached that state. So I come back around to say that I do see the value for the cultural transformation policy, but there's still concerns about the long-term impact of these changes. You know, I mean, we have to wait and see whether it will lead to meaningful improvements. But it's a lot. So I just want everyone and stakeholders out there to beware of the burnout, beware of the brain drain, beware of the great resignation and the quiet quitting that I spoke about in my other podcast. Let the UK and the US be a warning when teachers are leaving in droves. Now, here in the Caribbean, teachers may not leave physically, but you know how it will be done. There, but not there. And just like the children who show up to be babysat, like holding cells until they age out, have you really spoken to a child in a non-prestigious school? Hmm? There's a collective side eye from teachers probably going on here. They will tell you they have bigger fish to fry, or rather more important scenes to link than patriotism. So yes, it's a good initiative and it's needed because many students experienced learning loss in the last 4 years, where they spent about 2 years online and came out worse for it behavior-wise. Who were they home with again? So now the teacher has to do that person's job. So addressing these concerns through open communication and comprehensive training and adequate resources can help educators feel more confident and capable in implementing cultural transformation policy. But we'll see how that goes. So at minimum, close coordination is required across the schools between teachers and parents and community partners. But I'll tell you something, half the time you can't get some of these people in school. You can't get parents in school, right? There's sanctions and checks in place for teachers. Of course, you may not know, yes, but no consequences for children, no consequences for their parents. That's something I want you to consider, because any cultural and moral transformation agenda relies on all the stakeholders reinforcing consistent values and expectations for the ethical and principled conduct that we are expecting through the cultural transformation policy. So let's address now what I will call, here part 4, and that's the case for teacher inclusion in the decision-making process. There's a lot we don't know. I'm telling you, we're there and we're talking about it. We have a document, but there's still a lot we don't know. And before all this, no, I'm sorry, because I'm guessing here, because I would like to hope that the ministries and other stakeholders did include teachers in the decision-making process. And let me tell you why this is so important and why teachers must be valued partners in cultural policy changes. Because any major initiative that's going to be used to drive cultural transformation in school is doomed to fail unless it really involves teachers in the process. Because when teachers are the authorities when it comes to understanding a school's culture and the community context, they have that on the ground insight, right, that others who craft policies don't have. And in any workplace, you know that the people on the ground tend to generally have a better idea of what's really going on. And teachers are the lifeblood. Teachers are the ones implementing the curriculum, the disciplinary standards, the values, the life skills. And these things are now becoming mandated. I mean, they already were there, but through this policy, these things are becoming mandated, and teachers are the ones going to be implementing it. So they literally shape and transfer the culture to students each day through their teaching methods, classroom management, interpersonal interactions, and mentorship. Right? No teacher, if the teachers are not on board with this, well, the transformation process is not going to occur. And yes, teachers will try, they always do. You find all the good people there. You will find the good people. But as I said, you need to be aware of the burnout, of the overburden, the extra load on teachers. So, there are studies after studies out there that have shown that, a top-down education reform, it's going to struggle, right? When it just comes from institutions that are disconnected from the realities of what's really going to work best for any unique environment or any unique school environment. So think about it. If somebody just comes with a big stick and tells you you have to do nothing without asking you first, you obviously are going to be resentful. So something disconnected from what people believe in about cultivating proper mindset and behaviors, if they don't believe in that, and you're going to have problems. If people feel disrespected and devalued because no one asked them about what approach would best work in their community's distinct needs, and in here, I mean in their distinct and unique school culture, what might work in one place, you must know will not work in another. And you simply just think about what we might call a prestige school or private school as opposed to other types of schools. And that's going to be undermine the best intention transformation policy. Why put in the hard work of implementing the change if your voice and your professional expertise was not sought? you know. And the pushback might be passive, it might be active, but it is going to cripple, you know, achieving any real cultural change. And this is not a threat, right? I'm not threatening that teachers are not going to do it. We've all worked in workplaces. We've done group works. Everybody's done group work where you know that some people work and some people don't. And that's the reality for all workplaces. But if you have to give to get, that's basically it. You have to give to get. So if you have a policy that's founded on true teacher engagement, then it's really going to take root successfully because you'll have the teachers willing to go that extra mile to institute this change because they feel valued and trusted. And that's going to inspire them because they will feel that their insights have helped to shape, the programs that's unique to their school's cultural environment. And the nations of the Caribbean, we here have passionate educators. We have fiercely committed educators who are there to empower the next generation with all these values, skills, behaviors. But respecting their voice is important. It's not just the right thing to do, right? So the cultural transformation policy sees just various ministries, I'm assuming ours is not the only one, attempting to institute systemic changes to curricula and to disciplinary procedures using faculty training and just trying to overhaul school culture. And it is, I tell you, a worthy goal because it looks at trying to instill stronger values, and we need that, right? So many poor, just morally corrupt and value systems are out there, trying to reduce antisocial behavior. Look at groups of, social groups of young people. And, everything is balanced. There's some amazing children out there. There's some amazing parents doing really fabulous jobs out there. but I see the value in equipping students with vital life skills because it's really lacking. I'm still concerned, and maybe I'll do a part two and let you guys know how it went. I don't know, maybe not a 7 years wait part two, but at least the initial, response or reception to the cultural transformation policy. But I have questions, and I feel that you should have too. Because what issue is the cultural transformation policy aiming to address? Yes, I did touch on them, morally corrupt society and all of that. And yes, we have seen a rise in problematic student behaviors and social media. If you didn't know, would have shown many of you now what, the underbelly of what's taking place in the school system, besides the bullying and the violent substance abuse. But there's a general lack of respect for authority. And I want you to think about that. I still come back to the question of the focus being put on the teacher's role here in the implementation of the cultural transformation policy. How would a policy planner respond to, the criticism that teachers weren't adequately consulted? There were questions and little tentacles thrown out about concerns from the unions that educators were not adequately involved in the policy development process, but I have not heard any word back from it. Maybe you can help, clarify in the comments. And then my final question, final here, but not the only question that, the last question I have to ask, how are we going to ensure the successful implementation given the varying school cultures that we have in our country and in the region? I want you to sit with that one for a while. So, my listeners, cultural transformation policy is coming on stream. Look out for it. Look out for the changes. Thank you for joining me on this episode of Teachers Have Issues, Yes. And I hope this information helps you understand a bit more about developments taking place in the education sector. Until next time, this has been Lana, the educator. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. Remember, you empower minds and you ignite curiosity.